Morning all. And it's the happiest of Mondays because today we're being told when we'll be allowed out. Although, of course, without knowing whether that will actually kill us. So, it's more of a middling Monday, really. Anyway, this is the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's lockdown rules expert, Dan Bloom. We're going to take you through what we can expect later on from Boris Johnson, and through it all, we want you to ask us your questions. So whatever you want to know the answer to, get into the comments, ask us, and we'll do our best to answer them for you. Can't ask them all, but we'll answer the best ones. So what have we got today? Well, since telling us a week and a half ago he couldn't tell us anything yet, we've been told an awful lot of detail about what Boris Johnson is going to tell us later on. So, Dan, the big thing, the headline really at the moment is that all schools are back on March the 8th. But how is the rest of it looking? What else is going to be in there today?
So the big thing is social contact. And I don't mean actually going round your grand's house and holding hands with her and giving her a hug. But we're talking about sort of outdoor social contact. At first, on March the 8th, you should be able to see one friend in the park for recreation. That's like a picnic and a coffee on the bench. At the moment, you're only supposed to see each other for exercise. So that's a really small change. You still have the stay-at-home order, that sort of thing, most of the time.
So you can sit down outside rather than just walking about.
Exactly, yeah. Police can't have you sitting on a bench. Hooray, what times we live in. And then on March the 29th is the really big change for outdoor kind of socializing. You'd be able to meet in either a group of up to 6 people or a group of up to 2 households, which can be more than 6 people, outdoors. And there's a suggestion that, it won't be stay at home, stay local anymore. You'd be able to travel to do that. You'd also be able to do socially distanced sports like golf, tennis, and some team sports as well. So basketball, grassroots football, that sort of thing. So it's quite a big change. But of course, what's not in that, and what we should learn this afternoon, is things like pubs, hairdressers, cafes, bars, restaurants. We haven't got opening dates for any of that yet. So
okay, fingers crossed. Now Jess says, how about we stop speculating and just wait for Boris to speak? This isn't speculation, Jess. This is the stuff that we know for a fact because it has been briefed out by Downing Street to a variety of journalists over a period of time. So we're here, the news agenda, we're not here to speculate and tell you stuff that's tripe. We're here to tell you the stuff that's actually definitely going to happen, and that's what we're doing. Tracy says, will all year groups be going back to school at the same time or having staggered time? This was a bit of a row, wasn't it? We were told, Dan, between Chris Whitty and some of the scientific advisors and Number 10. They wanted to have everyone go back at once, and the scientists were going, nah, could you do it in stages, please? Because 10 million children all at once. There's an angry Chris Whitty. That's his default face these days. So what's actually happening, and what's been going on behind the scenes?
So what we're being told, and this is not confirmed quite yet, but not speculation either, I promise you, is that it's all year groups at once, or more or less at once, in that week of March 8th. And a minister was out this morning and pretty much confirmed that as well. So that is the sort of big bang school return, if you like. Makes it a bit easier for parents, I would have thought, if you've got 1 year 6 kid and 1 year 4 kid and they don't go back at different times. Obviously, a bit more of a risk with the virus, like Susie was saying. So the teaching unions are not terribly happy. They've warned this seems reckless, and they want to know the evidence that shows that this will be okay and that it won't. It's not that kids are getting sick themselves. It's that this won't sort of provide a vector to spread it further in the community.
Yeah, and before the last lockdown, keep asking us your questions, everybody. We'll see if we can do our best to answer them for you. But before the last lockdown, there was some evidence, wasn't there, that older children, sort of over 11, were doing an awful lot to spread the transmission of this new, more infectious strains. And so am I right in thinking that the scientists were sort of happy for the younger year groups to go back early, but see how that works, and then perhaps try and bring the older year groups and the older school children back to school? But then there's the issue of getting into exam season, and the politicians probably, I would expect, wanted the older kids back sooner.
Well, I haven't seen all the scientific evidence, and some of it will only be published later date, but you just need to look at what Scotland and Wales are doing. They are both staggering schools return, but they're starting it earlier. So Scotland and Wales, kids are going back from today, but by the time all kids are back in England, there will still be some kids in Scotland and Wales that are still at home. So they're going for a very different approach, and it might be that we see some differences between the countries. Of course, there'll be an argument politically about whether you can blame that on the schools or whether there are other factors there too. Yeah. So Ellen's question is, when can we get the small independent shops open as opposed to the big four raking it in, please? I assume that's the sort of big four supermarkets she's talking about that sell clothes and all the rest of it. The short answer is we don't know. The long answer is that this is a 4-stage roadmap, and all the signs are that non-essential shops would probably be in stage 2. Now, we don't know when stage 2 starts. We should find that out this afternoon. But some of the reporting, BBC is suggesting there's going to be 5-week gaps between each stage. So that maybe suggests sort of mid-April or a little bit later for non-essential shops to start opening. So that's a long way off. That's like
after Easter. That's
2 months off. Yeah,
we're into spring. Yeah. And Donna says, do you think lockdown will happen again if the virus spikes? Now, you've got a really good point here, Donna, because so far we've got 120,000 people dead. Right, the scientists are saying that's going to be more like 150,000 by the end of this. The government's got lots of stuff talking about following the science, but all the briefings and leakings about what's happening for this roadmap have come out before the data was quite there to support it. They're supposed to have seen this data this weekend, and we've had the briefings before this weekend. Chris Whitty apparently not happy about the schools, and despite Matt Hancock yesterday saying, cheering, 1 in 3 adults have had the vaccine. In some places, especially minority communities, in Birmingham, in London, there are not enough people. In London, I think that there's a fifth of people over 80 have not had their vaccine yet. So if we are going to tackle that, because, care staff, frailer people in more vulnerable communities who need to have that don't get that jab, the NHS could, in theory, in the future, could it still be overwhelmed and we're therefore facing more restrictions down? Or is this the people who are not having the jab in small enough numbers that it doesn't matter? Or as Donna says, is it still big enough numbers not having the jab that we face possibly even a future lockdown?
It is possible. They're deliberately not ruling that out. It's less likely because of the vaccine, but no vaccine is 100% effective, and you will never get 100% of people taking a vaccine. So you're always going to have problems there if you open things up completely. Whether lockdown happens again, I mean, the reason we've got this 4-stage thing, which might take us into like June or July at the earliest, is because Boris Johnson is desperate for this to be the last lockdown. He's said it publicly. He's said, I do not want another lockdown. What he hasn't done is rule one out, because one of the tests for easing the lockdown for this roadmap and for all the dates we're going to get is that the cases aren't rising to a point that they would cause a surge in hospital cases. So if that happens, all bets are off, and all the dates that we get this afternoon will move.
Yeah. Now, Stephanie Leanne says, what the hell about gyms? Now, gyms are right down at the bottom of the list. Where are they in these groups that you mentioned? Group 84, 85?
I'm really sorry, but I don't know. We've asked continually, but in the spirit of not speculating, don't know. If I were to speculate, I would say that it is quite late on, that it's probably in group 3 or 4, because it's an indoor thing and they're opening outdoors first. That is the golden rule across everything they're announcing today. You can do things outdoors, but not indoors for a long time. So, gyms, you can't really move all that equipment out into the car park, can you? So
no, and nobody wants to see everyone else sort of sweating out there in the car park. It's not nice. Now, Miles says, will you be able to travel to see family? When do you think mixing indoors can happen? This stuff where you can see, perhaps in a few weeks' time or around Easter, you can go and meet up 6 other people outside. Is that anywhere in the country? So I could travel to Cornwall. I could go from Kent to Cornwall to see someone. I could go and see a relative at the other end of the country. Or am I going to have to try and keep it local?
So the minister was asked this morning, and he seemed to suggest that, yes, you can. Now, the problem with that, and that's from March the 29th, I should say. So March the 29th, up to 6 people or 2 households can meet for a picnic outdoors. Tories have suggested today that you can travel a long way to do that. Problem is, I think it's very, very unlikely that you would be able to have overnight stays at that point, or mixed indoors. So what happens if you travel all the way down to Cornwall? It's a sort of 5-hour drive or 6 hours from where you live, I assume.
Yeah.
And you get there, you can meet out for a picnic, but then you're not supposed to stay, so you'd have to come back. So
I also couldn't stay somewhere on the way. I couldn't stay in a travel lodge on the way.
That's to be confirmed, but that's none of what we've been told so far suggests that you'll be able to go for like holidays, short breaks, that sort of thing before Easter. There was some talk that you'd be able to do it, but at the moment, we don't think so. Now, there might be a bit of detail about self-contained if it's just your household stuff, but we've yet to see about that. I think we should wait.
I'm assuming as well, if you do go to travel to see a family member and have a picnic outside, say with Granny that you hasn't seen her grandchildren for a year in person, you still got to socially distance. They're still not allowed to hug.
That's right. All the suggestions at the moment is that you'll be able to meet outdoors, but you should still obey social distancing and all the rest of it. So unless you're in a bubble with your gran or what have you, you're still supposed to not hug your gran, which is.
But what if Gran's had the vaccine? If Gran's had the vaccine and she feels she's fine with that, and the children are not going to be at too much risk, and so on and so forth. They've been a year apart. You can't ask them to meet up and not have a big squeeze. If Gran's had the vaccine, surely the social distancing requirement isn't as strong.
Well, I think the problem here is that if you start telling one group of people one thing and one group of people another thing, you water down the sort of adherence to the rules that are left in the whole of society. Now, that's not the government trying to blame people in this instance. I don't think that's just a straight fact. If the edges of the rules start being blurred, and we saw this with the rules being very confusing last year, people will start to quite naturally take their own interpretations from it. And, if you have that policy, where does it start and where does it end? Do you say you can hug your gran after she's had the vaccine, but only 3 weeks after she's had the vaccine, because it takes a while for immunity to kick in? Or do you have to wait for the second dose of the vaccine, which is 12 weeks later? You couldn't draw a sort of firm line on this because the vaccine is never 100% effective, but it's a gradient that sort of moves over time and gets stronger the longer you've had it.
Yeah, and I suppose as well, it creates the two tiers of who's had a vaccine and can do something and who hasn't had the vaccine and can't. And as Chelsea down here is mentioning now, talking about holidays abroad, this raises the issue of vaccine passports and everything else. What do we know? Do we know anything about holidays abroad, or is that all speculation still at this stage? Is Boris going to tell us later on?
So I expect you'd be, first of all, it's speculation. And hopefully Boris will tell us later on. Prime Minister will tell us later on. But if I were to guess, I would say that I expect it's not going to be illegal to go abroad as it is now, because it looks like they're going to stop the stay-at-home order on sort of March the 29th. The question is whether it will be in any way practical for you to go abroad, or whether you could get insurance, because the Foreign Office advice might still advise you against travelling abroad. And the problem, when I say practical, I mean there might be requirements when, as a British person, you would go out to that country, and there might also be some very tough requirements when you come back. So the hotel quarantine system exists now if you've been in any of 33 countries in the last 10 days. You have to pay £1,750, which is out of reach for the vast majority of people financially, to stay in a hotel in one room where you can't leave the room except to sort of go out and smoke. So that whether families want to take a holiday under those circumstances, and even if they don't have to stay in a hotel, they have to stay at home for 10 days after they get back, that's the real problem. So it may be that you're allowed to go on holidays this summer technically, but that actually it's very, very impractical.
And I suppose you run the risk as well of the country that you've gone on holiday to being safe when you go, but being on the red list by the time you come back, and then having to quarantine, which you weren't expecting to do potentially when you return, which would be zero fun.
I can answer Zoe Ann's question. Can
there be a more socially distanced sport than golf? How can you be safer?
And for that reason, I think, this is to be confirmed this afternoon, but what we've been told so far is that golf can return on March the 29th. What you won't be able to do is have the clubhouse open. So you can go and play golf, but you can't go back and have a beer afterwards or what have you. So it depends.
tea.
It depends where Zoe Ann works. She might have to end up still being furloughed even after the golf course reopens if, say, she works behind the bar.
Yeah. Yeah, the most important question for any of us, I think, about hairdressers. My fringe is taking a swing to the right. Dan, when can I get someone? When can Rebecca as well get their hairdresser?
My hair is taking a swing in every direction, but it always does that. We don't know a date for hairdressers, Rebecca, but we should this afternoon. There's some talk of mid-April in stage 2, but that's to be confirmed.
Right, and I'm right in thinking, aren't I, that Boris Johnson's giving a comment to a statement to the Commons about 3:30, and then a press conference or a statement to the nation at 7.
That's right. So we should learn all the details at 3:30, and then he's kind of doing the greatest hits statement to the nation at 7. Sort of going back to what he's already said.
That's one of his statements where he does this a lot on a desk, and not a press conference, or is it?
No, it's a press conference. It should be a press conference with questions. So there's always the danger when that happens of him announcing it nice and clearly in the House of Commons and then getting mixed up when he gets asked questions about the detail. So let's hope, fingers crossed, that will not happen this time.
No, fingers crossed, Boris. Make sure you practice your speech this time. Now, I want to move on to the second question. Keep asking us your questions about lockdown. Dan's here. He knows an awful lot about it. If it's speculation, he will tell you so. And if it's fact, he will tell you so as well. But we want to talk about the second story that we got today. Now, the inside spread in the Mirror today has got here. There's millions of pounds here for catch-ups at school, although that raises questions about children being forced to address the academic losses of the past year and nothing else. But I really want to talk about this story across the top half here. Now, this is a guy called Sam Adams. He turned 34 years old yesterday, and he's in a home. He's got a neurodegenerative disease, and it's probably his last birthday. And that's his mum, Ruth, there in the photographs, who had to drop off his presents at the home yesterday because she still can't see him. After a year, despite the fact her husband and daughter have had the vaccine, she's happy to take a test. And Sam himself has had the virus. He is immune now. He's fine. And he's she says, quite close to death. The next infection he gets could carry him off. He used to, a year ago at the start of lockdown, he could speak to her. And now he can only really make vocal noises. And he's so distressed at not seeing his family. He's ringing them up to 60 times a day and making these distressed noises at them. I mean, she calls it an atrocity, and I've got to agree with her, Dan. Now, people have been saying for a year, haven't they? They've been campaigning and saying, let us see our family in care homes. Give us PPE, give us lateral flow tests, let us get them to hold their hands, because they are literally disintegrating in these homes without their families and their loved ones. But the government is still not setting rules on it. They're still leaving it up to the individual care homes, and they're kind of dependent upon what their insurers say, which is over cautious all the time. So people like Sam aren't seeing their families. Do we know anything about what's going to be happening with them?
A little. So what an absolutely horrific case. While I wasn't the reporter who looked into this specific one, that's one of my colleagues, but what I can say is at the moment, you are supposed to be able to do some kind of care home visiting if the home will allow it, but with things like screens or pods or seeing each other through a window. What you are meant to be able to do is see someone who's, for want of a better phrase, on their deathbed. You should be able to do that. And that's in the law, it's an allowance. I think what there isn't is a hard kind of law saying that care homes must allow you to do it. And I think that's the issue that's being raised here. It's down to care homes' individual discretion. And perhaps the one in this case is being ultra cautious and then, leaving this family heartbroken. The big change is that on March the 8th, from March the 8th, if you're in England and in a care home, you'll be able to name, or the family will be able to name, sort of one regular visitor who comes to visit. And that means actually visiting in the room and holding hands, which is a big difference to what it is now. It's very impersonal at the moment. But it still won't be like old times. You have to take a test beforehand, and you have to wear PPE of some kind. I'm not sure exactly what, sorry, when you're doing that visit. So for someone who's in, a difficult mental state, or someone with dementia or something like that, that could be difficult seeing the person you love who perhaps you don't recognize anyway, but in PPE, so it's even harder to kind of make that connection.
Yeah, as Joe says there, I hope that's answered your question, Joe. March the 8th, in theory, depending upon how your daughter's home is operating and what their public liability insurers let them do and things like that. But why has it taken a year, Dan? This is speculation. But this has been a problem for a year. They've been campaigning about this for a year. There have been pictures in newspapers and stories in newspapers about people who a year ago in their home were absolutely fine and dandy. There's some in the Mirror today of a lady completely glamorous and I think it's in the Mail actually, completely glamorous and done up, aged 80. And a year on, she's not wearing a bra, she's not wearing her dentures, she's just given up because there's no one coming to see her. How has it taken a year to get to the point where they say you can have one visitor?
Well, quite simply, I think because they've been extremely burned by the policy early in the pandemic of discharging people from hospitals into care homes to free up the beds for hospitals because they thought they were going to have this influx of COVID patients. What they were in fact doing was taking hospital patients who had asymptomatic COVID or their COVID hadn't been picked up, and putting them into care homes. That seeded the virus into care homes, say all the critics. And many, tens of thousands of people have died in care homes, and a huge proportion of the deaths in England have been in care homes. So we've now swung from this policy of kind of rushing people into care homes to being ultra, ultra cautious about it, which for families is obviously heartbreaking.
Yeah, and Megan's got a very apt point here. How is it we can't see anyone, our loved ones, whether in care homes or at the other end of the country, but Prince Charles get to see his father just because he fell sort of ill with something we don't particularly know what it was, but everyone involved's had their vaccine, so it's not that bad. How come he got to go in and hold his dad's hand and no one else can?
So I appreciate I didn't cover this story, but I've seen some talk that it is actually allowed, as far as I know, to visit someone under the law. It's allowed to visit someone in a hospital if they're a close family member, if they're receiving hospital treatment. I think what the issue potentially here is whether the hospital allows it, because clearly, NHS hospitals are not a free-for-all on visiting hours at the moment. But I think Prince Philip's in a private hospital, obviously, so yeah. It might be. There was some talk of, was it illegal? I don't think so, and that's me not having covered the story fully. But it may just be a case of one hospital's rules over another's.
Yeah, if it was illegal, we wouldn't have heard about it. Probably they do have enough people around them to stop us finding out about the things that might be illegal, at least for a decade or so, in the case of Prince Andrew. So they've done it because they're allowed to do it. So perhaps the hint here is if you can afford tens of thousands of pounds for private hospital treatment for your loved one, then you'll be absolutely fine. But if you're reliant upon a care home or a hospital, then or NHS hospital, you may have to wait a little bit longer. Bit unfair and unreasonable, but there we go.
I should say that if, I'm sure if any of our dads were in hospital and the hospital allowed us to visit, we would do it, wouldn't we?
Oh yeah, we would. No, I don't blame Prince Charles in the least, especially if your parent is 99 years old and he's a bit dicky. It's a case of going to see him and making sure he's okay. And he isn't the only visitor Prince Philip's had while he's been in hospital. But when you've got people like Sam Adams who've had no visitors for a year and have degenerated to the point that they're grunting in distress at their loved ones down the phone 60 times a day, something's amiss. If I was the Prime Minister, I'd be ashamed of myself. Anyway, let's move on. I want to talk about some good news now because there is some positive stuff that we can take away at the end of all of this. Ta-da! Now, in a year of medical firsts, there is one that has got absolutely nothing to do with COVID and is worth taking a lot of notice of. This is page 2 in the Mirror today, and it's got a picture of 16-year-old Anna Hadley from Worcester. There she is, giving a thumbs up, and she has been the first person, the first child, I should say, to get a heart transplant using a revolutionary new procedure whereby the heart can be taken from the donor after circulatory death. Normally, they have to take the heart while it's still beating so that it's put in as fresh as possible into the new donor, into the new recipient rather. But they have got a machine which makes it possible to get a heart after it may have stopped beating, which of course massively increases the number of potential heart organ donors that you've got available for all these children who need it. They've done this before in adults, but never in children. So, Darren, this is brilliant news, especially for Hadley and people like her, Anna and people like her. But it's also following our organ donor campaign in the past year or so, in which people don't have to opt into this anymore, because it means so many more organs are made available for people who really need it.
It's fantastic. And it's what's amazing about the medical side of it is remembering that we're only, I think, 54 years since the first heart transplant in the world, you know, and this is such a new technology really in the scheme of things, and it keeps getting better, keeps saving more people's lives. And you know, they're now, people like this in this story, you now have a full life ahead of you, or you know, instead of being 15 or 16 and looking in an early grave. It's fantastic, and reminds me of something that I think one of the government scientific advisors said about COVID, that with the way that we've developed the vaccine, for example, for COVID, and the speed and the method used for that, it sort of didn't exist maybe a decade or two ago. The technology just wasn't there. So, you know, if this pandemic had come in the 60s or the 70s, we would be in a very different position. It's a nice glimmer of hope, isn't it, that amid all the doom and gloom, there are some extremely intelligent people out there making life better for the rest of us.
Exactly, and this system, this portmanteau, the system they managed to develop of taking the messenger RNA, not the DNA, it should be said, the messenger RNA, the instructions for how to do something in the cell, taking that and putting that into your immune system so that it recognizes those instructions later on. It's like giving your immune system forewarning of a particular recipe that it needs to look out for. Then you could potentially use that to do so many other things where your cells malfunction. So if your heart has some diseases, some cancers can all be affected maybe by this. Maybe we could even get a vaccine against cancer at some point in the future. Never mind all the other infectious diseases and viruses. So they can just plug into this brilliant whizzy system, just drop a new bit of RNA in, bang, off we go. Now, we've got a few more questions on lockdown before we tootle off and leave you to go about your Mondays. And Tracy asks, why are shops one of the last things to open when they've already made them safe in the first lockdown? There's been an awful lot of shops down who've put a lot of thousands of pounds into measures to make their shops safe. So how come they are, you know, non-essential, but happening so much later?
Well, I guess the simple answer is that we've learned through hard experience that no matter how safe you make things, it's not as safe for the virus as keeping everyone locked up at home. So, you know, they can't open just because they've been made COVID secure and so forth, even though that does make them a lot safer to go in. I should say, I don't think they're the last thing to reopen. I think we should get shops in stage 2 of 4, but that's still obviously, you know, a wait of almost 2 months we're talking about. So we should get the dates from Boris Johnson this afternoon.
Yeah. Now, Josie says, I still don't understand why it is that when people have the vaccine, it doesn't stop you getting COVID, does it? No, it kind of remind me about this, Dan. It kind of the vaccine is like how can I put it? The vaccine is like the recipe book for a particular recipe, and it just tells your immune system what the dish looks like if it ever turns up. And then when it turns up in your system, it goes, aha, I recognize you, and gets rid of it. Is that right? So you do have to be infected for the vaccine kind of to kick in a way.
I must admit, I'm not sure about that, but I think I think that Josie's question is talking to a couple of different things. So there are a few things they look for with the vaccine. Does it stop you getting COVID at all? If it doesn't, does it stop you getting seriously ill? And does it stop you transmitting it to other people? So it's not just about whether the vaccine stops you from getting sick. It's about whether it stops you from getting COVID in any way and being able to pass that COVID to other people. And those are the tests that they're hoping to get the results for, you know, shortly this week and get more evidence on in the coming weeks. So that's, I guess the point of the question was probably, what's the point in the vaccine if it doesn't do this? Because it's all kind of measures and increments of stuff. It's not black and white. It's not this switch that you switch on and off. It's about us fighting this battle against this horrible virus and pushing it back and back and back and back with sort of lockdown and vaccines and stuff. And the combination of everything we're doing will help push it down, and hopefully won't get rid of it at this point, but will make it something we can manage like the flu.
Yeah, the vaccine should stop it being transmitted in the community as thoroughly as it has been. And if you do get it, you should get less symptoms, fewer symptoms, less of an impact, less likely to die. So that's why you have the vaccine, I think, roughly.
Shall we take the hint and us shut up and wait until? So it's 3:30 p.m. Lynette, that Boris Johnson will announce the roadmap, and then it's 7 p.m. that you get a press conference after that. So I think we've gone through a lot of it, and I will not speculate any further ahead of.
Yeah, our speculation for today has come to an end. We'll just sit around, twiddle our thumbs now till 3:30, and Boris Johnson comes out and tells us we had it right all along. It's fingers crossed that actually we do get some way out of this. But as we've said, there are so many things to take as a positive from this. Anna's got a new heart. We've all got a new way of having vaccines. We should be getting through this. It's just going to be slower and cautious, more cautious perhaps than the politicians would like to have us believe. But keep your head down, and I'm sure we'll get through it in one piece. I'll see you again for another news agenda on Wednesday. Thank you for joining me, Dan. Thank you for watching, everybody. Bye-bye.